So in terms of the PPP program in Bangladesh, we've had the same experience as many other countries have had in terms of we started off with PPPs being done on a project by project basis without there being a framework around it. And in the country of Bangladesh, it came out from the sort of 80s where we did a large number of individual projects. And we used to call them sort of BOT, Build, Operate, Transfer, or BOO, Build, Own, Operate projects. And these were done in the 80s all the way to the mid-90s. In the mid-90s, what we were looking at was looking at how we can develop the power sector, and that was quite a critical sector for us in terms of developing further. There's a huge gap in terms of our generation capacity in power. So we moved away from a project-specific basis to a sectoral basis, where we developed a PPP policy on power, and we did a large number of projects in power. Two projects like the Meghnaghat project was 450 megawatts, the Haipur project was 350 megawatts, and these were done in the late 90s and early 2000s. Then we were looking to expand beyond a sector-based approach to go into a cross-sectoral approach, and we issued a new policy in 2004 called the Private Sector Infrastructure Guidelines. And the whole idea was to move away from a single sector into a multi-sectoral approach. However, that movement did not yield the massive success we were hoping for. We did quite a large number of projects in telecoms, in ports, but there was a very little movement in other sectors like roads, bridges, health and education. So in 2010, and this is what the new program came about, was we looked at developing PPP on a program basis, but on a centralized program basis, where we actually changed a large number of our framework, covering institutional arrangements. Where we started off with a new PPP office who were looking at the centralized regulatory function and also facilitation. We issued a number of new finance products to give long-term financial support, and also different types of subsidy like VGF called viability gap financing. And we also streamlined our approvals process. The impact of all these changes is now that we've gone from a small number of projects in 2011 to about over 40 projects, 42 projects at the moment, worth about $13 to $15 billion in our pipeline. So it seems that at the moment that the institutional reform that we did in order to help promote PPP is working. We are on the right steps, and we can see a large pipeline developing. So PPP is actually a fundamental component of the government strategy for delivering infrastructure. But in the context of Bangladesh, there has been not a lot of PPP projects done in the road sector and the bridge sector and so on and so forth. So the whole idea is we need to incentivize and encourage the private sector to participate in the PPP space. To help that, one of the key areas that we're working on is capacity development. So this is the marketing, the interaction with the private sector, promoting these projects to the private sector, and actually bringing projects which are very well developed, that are bankable, that can actually earn a reasonable commercial return for a reasonable sharing of risk. So the main effort is actually in terms of the capacity building of the private sector, and also the capacity building of the public sector, to make sure we can bring projects to the private sector which they find attractive for them. The other thing is we also need to work on the financing areas. In Bangladesh, we have a capacity shortage in terms of long-term financing availability. So we're looking at developing new products, new financial products that allow us to support and reinforce the banking capacity. So for example, currently our commercial debts is about 7 years to 10 years, but most PPP projects usually have a contract period much longer than that. So there's a gap between what the financing capacity is and what we need. So this is where government has set up a few institutions. These are state-owned institutions where they are there to provide supplemental or additional financing in order to bridge this gap. So this is one of the areas that we're looking at to encourage. The other thing is we're also welcoming foreign investment. The program we have, we recognize that we will need both local and international participants joining together and coming to invest in these projects. And therefore we are also developing a whole program so that it actually meets the international expected standards of delivery. We're looking at setting up our contractual documentations, our concession agreements, our procurement basis on an international level. so that international players can come in and recognize the risk allocation is something that they are so comfortable with, and that will hopefully attract also more participation. And finally, project preparation is key, and for that we are using international standard advisors who are coming in to help us put these projects together.